Disclaimer. This book may contain content that is considered historically inaccurate or culturally insensitive by modern standards. My hope is that by exploring old literature, we will better understand why people of the past thought the way that they did and understand the influences that shape their culture. This video is not intended for young audiences. Hi, I'm Morgan, and today I'm excited to read to you from Out of Door book. This is the 7th book in a series or a collection of books called The Children's Hour, which were published by Houghton Mifflin Co. in 1907. The Girl and the Panther by Louis du Couret. We had gained some distance from the group of bathers when we were startled by a shrill, agonizing cry, which seemed to come from that direction. Retracing our steps in haste, we found the bathers crowding together in consternation, a dozen young girls in the midst of them tearing out their hair and beating themselves with all their might, according to the Arab custom, in token of despair. From these girls we learned that, just as they were plunging into the river, an enormous panther sprang among them, and, seizing one, threw her upon her back, and fled away toward the mountain with her prey. In a short time, more than 300 Arabs had arrived at the spot, some armed with lances and battle-axes, others with scimitars, pistols, and matchlocks, for so piercing was the cry of the young girl, carried off by the savage beast, that it had penetrated to the encampment, and was heard in the still night through the gardens and dwellings of Merab. People guessed by instinct at the cause of it, armed themselves in haste, and came down upon the banks of the Dona. Just as they arrived, the terrible yells of panthers indicated the course to be taken. Then every man uttered an imprecation, abays were tucked up, arms made ready for action, and the avengers dashed forward in pursuit of the fierce prowler. In a short time they had crossed the valley of the dikes, and gained the foot of one of the mountains by which it is flanked, up which, in the bright moonlight, they saw 2 panthers going at great speed. The foremost of the 2 beasts appeared to bound forward with great difficulty, encumbered as she was with the burden carried by her. By a providential chance, the girl, a child of 8 or 9 years, had so fallen on the panther's back that she could clasp the neck of the monster with her arms, clinging to her with all her might, and burying her hands in her thick fur. The second panther could readily have outstripped the first, but appeared to keep behind for the purpose of covering the retreat. Once in view of the panthers, the hunters, hitherto scattered upon the track, closed together into a compact group, each man pressing forward and putting himself to the top of his speed to be the first at the attack. 100 reports now rang through the hollows of the mountain, and the hindmost panther rolled heavily to the ground, uttering fearful yells. The other beast, seeing that her pursuers were gaining upon her, and frightened, probably, by the shots, redoubled her efforts to escape, still keeping fast hold of her victim. But the space between her and the hunters was diminishing visibly. Long since they would have fired upon her, but through fear of injuring the child, to save whom the only chance appeared to be to attack the animal with lance and sword. 20 of the pursuers, more nimble, more vigorous than the rest, were now upon her, when suddenly she dived into a hole under a great mass of rock, and disappeared from their view. Now, who dares to follow? The hunters are looking at each other in fear and doubt, when a young man from among them throws off his samada, abay, and fota, places his scimitar between his teeth, and, taking a torch and axe in one hand, and a pistol in the other, creeps into the tavern. The panther, dazzled by the light of the torch, sat still in the chamber of the den, the young girl lying on the floor beside her, swooning, but not dead, for her body was still palpitating. The hunter looked steadily at the wild beast, who glared in turn upon him, gathering herself up for a spring, while the grotto resounded with her angry growls, her eyes glowing like globes of fire, her hair bristling up on end, and her tail thrashing her flanks as she curled her lips to display her terrible teeth. For, exhausted as she was by her long run, she was ready to do battle, no longer, however, for her prey, but now in defense of her cubs, which were in the den, for this was the female panther. Before she could spring upon him, however, the hunter took steady aim, and sent a pistol bullet through her shoulder. Then came fearful plunges and yells, and a deadly combat between man and beast, and then a dead silence. Now some of those outside, shamed into action, crept into the den, from which they soon emerged, while dragging with them the body of the panther, while others carried out the young girl, and assisted her defender, who was wounded. Here Abu Bakr el-Douani, lifting up his voice, cried in a loud tone, Allah has clearly extended his protection to this young girl, for not only has he sent a man of rare courage to defend her, but also one of unlimited knowledge to heal her wounds. Approach, Haji, continued he, addressing me. Approach, and restore fully to life her who is still, perhaps, at the point of death. A passage was made for me through the crowd, but, having nothing with me in the way of remedies, I recommended that the wounded should be at once carried to the encampment, and, in little more than a quarter of an hour, they were both under my tent. By this time the little girl had partially recovered her senses, but she had a very severe wound in the side, where the panther had seized her with his teeth to throw her on his back. There was nothing in it, however, to dispel hopes of her recovery. The young man was severely lacerated on the breast, arms, and legs, but no bones were broken, nor was any joint displaced. He was able to move about, and, while I was attending to the wounds of the child, he treated his in the manner practiced by the Arabs for staunching a flow of blood, by putting a handful of mud on them. Several persons who had witnessed the events just narrated had gone to find the bodies of the two panthers and take their cubs from the den, and, having come down to the town with their trophies, they told the story of the hunt, which soon found its way to the tower, for in no country does the story run faster than in Arabia. Just as the wounded were leaving the encampment, a tumult of many voices reached us, and at the same time, notwithstanding the bright moonlight, the air lightened with a red glow, like that of some great conflagration. For the people of the town were coming toward us with shouts of joy, and a great torchlight procession, the Najib and his chief man at their head. Haji, said the Nagib, advancing towards me, I thank you for the care you have bestowed on this child, who is a relative of mine, and one tenderly loved by her family. Then, calling to him the young Arab who had saved her, he asked him what he was. I am nothing but a poor Raqqa messenger, was the reply. Good, continued the Najib. You have a just claim upon my gratitude. I here constitute you one of my chiefs, nor will I fail to furnish you with the means for figuring creditably among them. And, further, you are from this moment the affianced husband for her whom you have snatched from death, who shall be your wife, if it should please Allah to spare her until she comes of age. Allah be praised and preserve our Najib, cried the young man. Allah be praised and preserve our Najib, repeated the people. And then a band of music, consisting of all the amateurs of the town, made the air vibrate with the sound of their instruments. 4 or 5 litters were constructed on the spot, upon one of which the young girl was placed, and her deliverer on another. They made me get upon one also, and on the others, which followed in our train. They drew along the dead panthers and their cubs, the latter contributing their squalls to the loud cries of the populace. Thus we moved forward in triumphal procession, the music first, the Najib and his chiefs following it, and then the litters, for the honor of bearing which on their shoulders the crowd fought and struggled. The people brought up the rear, uttering shouts of joy, blessing Allah, and praising the courage of the young man, and the goodness of the Najib, who had so nobly rewarded him. In this order we proceeded from the encampment towards the town, lighted by about twice as many torches as there were people, for nearly every one of our followers carried one in each hand. The procession took its way through all the streets of Marab, and the night was far advanced when this improvised festival was brought to a close. Thank you for listening to The Girl and the Panther by Louis du Couret with me, and I apologize if my pronunciation wasn't the best.